Captain HFY clicked his mandibles nervously as he watched the small human female walk through the corridors of the space station. She looked so ordinary, so fragile. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the basic civilian clothes that refugees typically received. Nothing about her suggested she was anything more than another displaced person seeking shelter. "Are you certain about this?" HFY asked his intelligence officer, Lieutenant Korth. The Valerian's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep concern. "She appears to be just another human civilian." Korth's scales shifted from blue to purple, indicating his own uncertainty. "The facial recognition software matched her with 97.3% accuracy, sir. But the records we have are from 15 years ago. She was much younger then." Through the observation window, they watched as the woman, identified in their databases as Sarah Chen, helped an elderly Kriegan carry his belongings to the refugee quarters. Her movements were fluid, efficient, but she seemed to deliberately make herself appear smaller and weaker than she actually was. 15 years, HFY mused. She would have been barely adult by human standards during the Void War. The Void War. Even now, a decade after its end, the mere mention of those dark years sent chills through every civilized species in the galaxy. The Harbingers had come from the dark space between galaxies, creatures of living shadow and twisted metal that consumed entire worlds. They had swept through the outer rim systems like a plague, destroying everything in their path. The major powers of the galaxy, the Valerian Republic, the Kriegan Empire, the Thol Confederation, had all fallen back in terror. Their most advanced weapons had proven useless against the Harbinger's adaptive technology. Entire fleets had been consumed, turned into more Harbinger ships that grew stronger with each victory. And then, when all seemed lost, the humans had arrived. Nobody had expected much from the newest members of the galactic community. Humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years earlier. They were considered a primitive species, barely worth notice. Their military was small. Their technology seemed crude compared to the great powers. But the humans had something the others lacked. They didn't know how to give up. "Show me her file again," HFY commanded. The holographic display materialized between them, showing a much younger version of the woman now helping refugees. In the old photos, Sarah Chen wore the black uniform of the Human Defense Corps, her face hard with determination. The medals and commendations listed after her name went on for several screens. "Sarah Chen, age 19 at the start of the Void War," Korth read aloud. "Enlisted as a basic infantry soldier. By the end of the war, she held the rank of colonel and commanded the Experimental Special Operations Division." HFY studied the commendations. "The miracle of Kepler Station, the liberation of New Haven, the final stand at Terra Prime." His voice grew quieter with each name. These were legendary battles, turning points in the war that had saved billions of lives. "According to these records, she personally led the assault team that destroyed the Harbinger Command Nexus," Korth continued. "The action that ended the war." Through the window, they watched Sarah laugh at something the elderly Kriegan had said. She looked so normal, so peaceful. It was hard to believe this was the same person who had once walked through Harbinger ships like an angel of death. "Why is she here?" HFY wondered aloud. "Why isn't she on Earth, receiving the honors she deserves?" The answer to that question lay in Sarah's own past, though she had told no one her story. After the war ended, she had tried to return to normal life. The human government had offered her promotions, political positions, anything she wanted, but Sarah had seen too much, lost too many friends. The nightmares came every sleep cycle, and the weight of what she had done, what she had been forced to become, pressed down on her like a physical thing. So she had quietly resigned her commission, changed her name, and disappeared into the vast galaxy. For 15 years, she had worked odd jobs on frontier worlds, helped with disaster relief, done whatever she could to make amends for the violence that had defined her youth. She told herself that Sarah Chen, the war hero, was dead. She was just Sarah now, nobody special. But the galaxy has a way of finding its heroes, whether they want to be found or not. "Sir," another officer called out urgently, "we're receiving distress signals from the outer sensor network." Zexhi's attention snapped to the tactical display. Red warning indicators were lighting up across the board. "What's the situation?" "Unknown ships approaching from the rim. Configuration doesn't match any known species." The officer's voice was tight with barely controlled fear. "Sir, the energy signatures are similar to Harbinger technology." The command center fell silent except for the humming of computers and life support systems. Every person present remembered the stories their parents had told them about the Void War, the descriptions of ships that seemed to eat light itself, of weapons that turned matter into screaming energy. "How many ships?" Zexhi asked, though he was already reaching for the general alarm. "Sensors are having difficulty getting accurate readings. The ships seem to absorb our scanning beams. Best estimate is between 12 and 20 vessels, destroyer class or larger." Zexhi closed his eyes for a moment. The station's defenses were adequate for dealing with pirates or smugglers, but against Harbinger-level technology, they might as well try to stop a supernova with a handheld shield. "Send out evacuation orders to all civilian ships in the system," he commanded, "and contact the Republic fleet. Tell them we need immediate assistance." "Sir, the nearest fleet elements are 8 hours away, even at maximum jump speed." 8 hours. They would all be dead in 8 hours, if these really were Harbingers returning. But Zexhi was a professional military officer, and he would do his duty regardless. "All hands to battle stations," he announced over the ship-wide communication system. "This is not a drill. Prepare for possible hostile contact." Throughout the station, alarms began to wail. Civilians ran for the evacuation ships while military personnel rushed to their positions. In the refugee quarters, Sarah Chen looked up at the sound of the alarms, and for just a moment, her carefully maintained facade slipped. Lieutenant Korth saw it happen. One moment she was just another frightened civilian, and the next, her entire posture changed. Her eyes became cold and calculating, scanning the area with the practiced gaze of someone who had seen real combat. Her hands moved to where weapons would normally hang, found nothing, and clenched into fists instead. "She knows," Korth whispered. "She knows what those alarms mean." On the tactical display, the unknown ships were getting closer. Their approach was methodical, purposeful. They moved in formations that the computer identified as 73% similar to recorded Harbinger attack patterns. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the lead ship," the communications officer reported. "Put it through." The main screen flickered, and then showed something that made every person in the command center step backward in terror. It was humanoid in basic shape, but wrong in every detail. Its skin was pale gray metal that seemed to shift and flow like liquid. Its eyes were solid black, reflecting nothing. When it spoke, its voice sounded like the grinding of broken machinery. "Inhabitants of this station," it said, "we are the inheritors, successors to those you called Harbingers. You will surrender your defensive systems and prepare to be absorbed into our collective. Resistance will result in immediate termination." The transmission ended, leaving only the sound of terrified breathing in the command center. "Inheritors," Zexhi repeated quietly. "I thought the Harbingers were extinct." "Perhaps they evolved," Korth suggested. "Or perhaps some escaped and rebuilt." Neither possibility was comforting. The original Harbingers had been nearly unstoppable. If these inheritors possessed the same technology, improved by years of development, then the galaxy was facing another dark age. "Sir, The inheritors are demanding a response in 30 seconds, or they will open fire. Zexhai looked around the command center at his crew. These were good people, professionals who deserved better than to die in some forgotten corner of space. But he also knew that if he surrendered, these creatures would spread across the galaxy like a plague, just as their predecessors had done. "Send them our answer," he said quietly. "Tell them the Valerian Republic does not negotiate with genocidal machines." The communications officer nodded and transmitted the message. On the tactical display, the Inheritor ships began to change course, moving into attack formation. "All hands brace for impact," Zexhai announced. "Today we make our stand." But even as he spoke the words, he knew they were doomed. The station's weapons were already charging, and the crew was preparing to sell their lives as dearly as possible. It would be a noble death, but ultimately meaningless. Unless... "Korth," Zexhai said suddenly. "That human woman, is she still on the station?" "Yes, sir. All civilian evacuations have been delayed due to the proximity of the enemy fleet. Zexhai made a decision that would either save them all or get them killed even faster. Bring her to the command center, now." "Sir? You heard me. If those really are Sarah Chen's service records, then she's the only person on this station who has actually fought these things before and won." Korth hesitated. "Sir, with respect, that was 15 years ago. She's a civilian now. And even if she is who we think she is, she's just one person." Zexhai watched the Inheritor ships closing in on the screen. Their weapons were beginning to glow with the same sickly green light that the old Harbinger ships had used. "Lieutenant, during the Void War, that one person destroyed an entire Harbinger fleet with nothing but a damaged cruiser and a squad of Marines. Right now, she's the best hope we have." Korth saluted and rushed from the command center. Through the corridors of the station, he could hear the sound of weapons charging and crew members saying goodbye to loved ones over the communication system. The evacuation ships were trapped in the docking bays, unable to launch without being immediately destroyed. He found Sarah Chen exactly where the security cameras had last seen her, helping organize the civilian refugees. She was calm in the midst of the chaos, efficiently directing people to emergency shelters and making sure the children stayed with their families. "Ms. Chen," Korth called out, slightly out of breath from running. She turned to look at him, and again he saw that brief flicker of something dangerous in her eyes before she composed herself. "Yes, officer?" "How can I help?" "The captain needs to see you immediately. It's urgent." Sarah glanced around at the refugees, clearly reluctant to leave them. "I'm helping coordinate the shelter assignments. Surely someone else can—" "Ma'am, with respect, the captain was very specific. He needs to see you now." Something in Korth's tone must have convinced her. Sarah nodded and followed him through the corridors toward the command center. As they walked, she asked quietly, "Those alarms. It's not a drill, is it?" "No, ma'am, we're under attack." "By who?" Korth hesitated. "We're not entirely sure. They call themselves the Inheritors, but their technology appears to be based on Harbinger designs." Sarah stopped walking so abruptly that Korth nearly ran into her. "Harbingers?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. I know civilians aren't supposed to know about." "How many ships?" The question was asked with such quiet authority that Korth found himself answering before he could think about it. "Approximately 15 to 20 vessels, destroyer class or larger." Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, Korth saw something that made him take an involuntary step backward. The friendly civilian woman was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she could kill him with her bare hands if necessary. "Show me to your command center," she said. They reached the command center just as the first exchange of weapons fire began. On the main screen, brilliant beams of green energy lanced out from the Inheritor ships, striking the station's shields. The barrier held for now, but everyone could see the energy readings dropping rapidly. Captain Zexhai turned as they entered. "Ms. Chen, I apologize for the urgency, but we have a situation that requires your expertise." Sarah looked at the tactical display, taking in the enemy formation, the station's defensive posture, the positions of the trapped civilian ships. Her analysis was swift and professional. "You know who I am," she said. It wasn't a question. "We have records indicating that you served with distinction during the Void War." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching the energy readings on the tactical display. The station's shields were down to 60% and falling. "That was a long time ago," she finally said. "I'm not that person anymore." "Ma'am, with respect, we're about to be overrun by enemies using Harbinger technology. If you have any knowledge that could help us—" "I said I'm not that person anymore." Sarah's voice cracked like a whip, and every person in the command center turned to stare at her. She caught herself, took a breath, and spoke more quietly. "I'm sorry. I left that life behind for good reasons." Another impact shook the station, shields down to 40%. Captain Zexhai stepped closer to her. "Miss Chen, I understand that you've been through trauma. I understand that you want to leave the past behind, but right now, there are 12,000 people on this station who are going to die unless someone who understands these enemies can help us fight them." Sarah stared at the tactical display. She could see the patterns in the Inheritor attack formation, could recognize the adaptive algorithms that their predecessors had used. The station's crew was brave and competent, but they were fighting the last war using tactics that had failed 15 years ago. "They're not exactly like the Harbingers," she said quietly, still studying the screen. "The ship configurations are different, more efficient. They've learned from their predecessors' defeats." "Can we fight them?" Sarah was quiet for another long moment. On the screen, the shields dropped below 30%. "Not with conventional tactics," she said finally, "but there might be another way." She turned to face Captain Zexhai directly. "I'll need complete tactical command of your military assets. No questions, no second-guessing, and I'll need a small team of volunteers for what's probably a suicide mission." Zexhai didn't hesitate. "Done. What do you need?" Sarah Chen looked around the command center one more time, seeing the hope and fear in the faces of the crew members. These weren't human soldiers trained for impossible missions. They were regular people doing their best in a situation beyond their experience. But she had once been a regular person too, before the war had changed her into something else. "First, I need you to stop firing at their ships," she said. "You're just giving them data about our weapon systems. Stop firing, but trust me. Second, I need detailed scans of their hull compositions and energy signatures. Third, I need a list of all the civilian ships currently docked at the station." As the crew rushed to carry out her orders, Sarah stared at the enemy ships on the screen. She had spent 15 years running from the memories of what she had done during the war, what she had been forced to become. But it seemed the galaxy wasn't ready to let Sarah Chen rest in peace. The woman who had once walked through Harbinger ships like death incarnate was about to return to the war she thought she had left behind forever. The silence in the command center was broken only by the hum of electronics and the distant rumble of the station's damaged shields trying to regenerate. Captain Zexhai had ordered his weapons to cease fire, against every instinct screaming in his military mind. But something about the way Sarah Chen studied the tactical display made him believe she knew what she was doing. "Scans are complete," Lieutenant Korth reported. "The Inheritor ships show a hull composition of approximately 60% unknown metal alloys, 30% organic compounds, and 10% what appears to be crystalline matrix technology." Sarah nodded grimly. "They've evolved. The original Harbingers were purely technological. These inheritors have incorporated biological elements into their design. She pointed at the energy readings. See how their power signatures fluctuate in a rhythm? That's not mechanical variation. That's something alive. Is that good or bad for us? HFY asked. Both. It makes them more adaptable, harder to predict, but it also gives them weaknesses that purely mechanical ships wouldn't have. Sarah turned to the communications officer. Are you still receiving their transmissions? Yes, ma'am. They're demanding surrender again. Good. Send them a response. Tell them we're prepared to discuss terms, but we need time to convince the civilian population to cooperate. HFY's mandibles clicked in confusion. You want to negotiate with them? I want to buy time while I figure out how to kill them all, Sarah replied calmly. How many civilian ships do we have docked? 47 vessels of various classes, mostly cargo haulers and passenger transports. Sarah studied the list, scrolling across her display. Perfect. I need you to begin emergency modifications to 12 of these ships. Strip out everything non-essential. Cargo holds, passenger accommodations, life support beyond what's needed for minimal crew. What are we turning them into? Weapons. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Sarah began pulling up technical specifications and structural diagrams, her fingers moving across the holographic interface with practiced precision. During the Void War, we learned that Harbinger ships had a critical weakness. They're designed to absorb and adapt to incoming energy attacks, but they have trouble processing multiple simultaneous inputs of different types. She highlighted sections of the inheritor ship configurations. See these sensor clusters along their hulls? They're more sophisticated than what the original Harbingers had, but the basic principle is the same. Korth leaned closer to study her diagrams. You're talking about sensory overload? Exactly. But it has to be the right kind of overload. Random noise won't work. Their adaptive systems will filter it out within minutes. We need something that mimics natural patterns they expect to encounter, but at intensities their sensors can't properly process. Sarah pulled up another display showing wave patterns and energy frequencies. These ships have incorporated organic elements, which means they're using bioneural networks for at least part of their processing. Bioneural networks have predictable limitations when it comes to sensory input. She turned to address the entire command center. I need teams working on 3 separate projects simultaneously. First team, you're going to modify the civilian ship's communication arrays to broadcast specific electromagnetic frequencies. Second team, you're working on the cargo haulers. We're going to fill them with materials that will create particular types of radiation signatures when they detonate. Third team, you're going to help me turn this station into the biggest signal amplifier in the sector. Captain HFY felt a mixture of hope and dread. This sounds like it requires precise timing and coordination across multiple variables. It does. And if we get it wrong, we'll just make them angry before they kill us. Sarah's expression was grim but determined. But if we get it right, we can overload their sensory processing to the point where their adaptive defenses shut down entirely. Then we hit them with everything we've got while they're blind and confused. The next several hours passed in a blur of desperate activity. Engineering teams worked around the clock to modify the civilian vessels, while Sarah moved between different sections of the station, checking calculations and adjusting specifications. She seemed to be everywhere at once, solving problems and making split-second decisions that kept the complex operation moving forward. Watching her work, Korth began to understand how someone so young could have become a legendary military leader. Sarah didn't just give orders, she understood every aspect of what needed to be done, from the technical details of electromagnetic wave propagation to the psychological pressure her teams were working under. "Ma'am," one of the engineering technicians called out, "we're having trouble with the frequency modulation on ship number 7. The civilian communication array wasn't designed for this kind of precision output." Sarah was beside him in moments, her hands already working on the technical display. "You're trying to force a square wave through a system designed for sine waves. Here, reroute the signal through the emergency beacon array, and use the cargo bay sensors as secondary emitters. The technician's eyes widened as her solution became clear. That shouldn't work according to standard engineering principles. Standard engineering principles don't account for combat conditions where you have to make impossible things work or everyone dies, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. Sometimes you have to break the rules to get the job done. Meanwhile, the inheritor ships continued their slow advance toward the station. Their leader had responded to the request for negotiation time with what might charitably be called amusement. "Your request for additional time is granted," the mechanical voice had said. "We find it entertaining to observe your futile attempts at resistance. Be aware that our patience is limited, and any attempt at deception will result in the immediate termination of all life on your station." Captain HFY monitored the enemy fleet's movements while Sarah worked. The inheritor ships had formed a perfect sphere around the station, cutting off all escape routes. Their weapons remained charged but not actively firing, and their sensor sweeps continued to probe the station's defenses. "They're learning our systems," he reported to Sarah during one of her brief visits to the command center. "Every minute we delay gives them more information about our capabilities." "I know, but we need that time. How are the modifications progressing?" "Ahead of schedule. Your engineering teams are working miracles." Sarah paused in her review of technical specifications. "They're not my teams, Captain. They're yours. I'm just giving them problems they can solve." "With respect, ma'am, I've never seen anyone coordinate an operation of this complexity under these conditions. Where did you learn to do this?" For a moment, Sarah's carefully maintained composure slipped, and HFY caught a glimpse of something that might have been pain. "Practice," she said quietly. "Lots of practice, in situations where failure meant entire worlds got consumed by mechanical monsters." She turned back to her calculations, but not before HFY saw her hands shake slightly. Whatever Sarah Chen had experienced during the Void War, the memories were still fresh enough to affect her. He found himself wondering what kind of person emerged from that level of trauma still functional enough to save others. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Korth approached with a status report. "All 12 civilian ships have been modified according to your specifications. The cargo haulers have been loaded with the radioactive materials you requested, and the station's communication array has been reconfigured as a signal amplifier." Sarah nodded, studying the tactical display one more time. The inheritor ships were holding position, but their energy readings suggested they were preparing for a final attack. "How long before they lose patience?" she asked. "Based on their previous communications, I estimate we have less than an hour before they begin active bombardment." "Then it's time." Sarah took a deep breath and turned to address the entire command center. "Everyone listen carefully. We get one shot at this, and the timing has to be perfect. If the sequence is off by more than a few seconds, the plan fails and we all die." She activated the tactical display so everyone could see the positions of the modified civilian ships, now spread throughout the local space in what appeared to be a random pattern. The civilian ships will begin broadcasting in sequence, starting with ships 1 through 4. Their signals will create the initial sensory overload pattern. 30 seconds later, ships 5 through 8 will add their frequencies to the mix. 60 seconds after that, ships 9 through 12 will activate. The communications officer raised his hand. "What about the cargo haulers with the radioactive materials?" "They go in after the inheritor's sensors are already overloaded. The radiation signatures will be the final element that crashes their adaptive systems entirely." Sarah's expression was grim. "But those ships will have to get close enough to the enemy vessels for the radiation to be effective. That means suicide runs," Captain HFY finished. "Yes, I need volunteers to pilot those ships, people who understand that they probably won't be coming back." The command center fell silent. Everyone present understood what was being asked. The modified cargo haulers would have to penetrate the Inheritor defensive formations and detonate their radioactive payloads at close range. The chances of the pilots surviving were essentially zero. To Zexhi's amazement, every single person in the command center raised their hand. "Sir," Lieutenant Korth spoke up, "I volunteer to lead the cargo hauler squadron." "As do I," added the communications officer. "And I," said the chief engineer. Sarah looked around the room at the sea of raised hands, and for a moment, her carefully controlled expression cracked. These weren't hardened human military personnel trained for impossible missions. These were ordinary people from a dozen different species, united only by their determination to protect the innocent civilians depending on them. "Thank you," she said quietly. "All of you. But I only need 4 pilots." She paused, making rapid calculations in her head. "Korth, you have the best tactical training. You'll lead the squadron. Communications officer, you know the signal timing better than anyone else, so you'll coordinate the approach. Chief engineer, you understand the technical specifications of the payloads." "What about the 4th pilot?" Zexhi asked. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical display. "I'll take the 4th ship myself." "Ma'am, no," Korth protested immediately. "You're needed here to coordinate the overall operation." "The coordination is already set up. Once the sequence starts, it runs automatically. But those cargo haulers are going to face defensive fire unlike anything you've ever seen, and they'll need someone with experience in this kind of combat to lead them through it." Captain Zexhi stepped closer to her. "Ms. Chen, you said yourself that you left that life behind. You don't have to do this." Sarah looked around the command center one more time, at the faces of people who had trusted her with their lives based on nothing more than faith and desperation. "Yes, I do," she said simply. "Because that's who I am. That's who I've always been. Even when I was trying to pretend otherwise." She turned to the tactical display and began the final sequence of commands that would either save them all or get them killed in the next few minutes. "All civilian ships, prepare for synchronized broadcast. Cargo haulers, begin final approach to your target coordinates. Station communication array, prepare for signal amplification on my mark." On the main screen, the Inheritor ships began to shift position slightly, their sensors detecting the unusual activity around the station. "They know something's happening," Zexhi reported. "Good. Let them wonder about it for the next 60 seconds. Sarah moved toward the command center exit, pausing only to look back at the crew one more time. "Captain, it's been an honor serving with you and your people." "Ma'am," Zexhi called after her. "For what it's worth, I think the galaxy was a darker place when Sarah Chen disappeared 15 years ago." Sarah paused in the doorway. "We'll find out in the next few minutes whether you're right about that." As she left the command center, heading for the docking bay where the modified cargo hauler waited for her, Sarah Chen allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be a soldier again. The fear was still there, the knowledge that she was probably about to die. But underneath the fear was something she had forgotten existed. The absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing, regardless of the cost. The woman who had once saved the galaxy was about to discover whether she could do it one more time. Sarah Chen sat in the pilot's seat of the modified cargo hauler, her hands moving across the controls with muscle memory that 15 years of civilian life hadn't quite erased. The ship felt clumsy compared to the military fighters she had once flown, but it would serve its purpose. In the cargo bay behind her, enough radioactive material to poison a small moon was secured in specially designed containers that would rupture on impact. "All cargo haulers, sound off," she spoke into her communication headset. "Hauler 2 ready?" Lieutenant Korth's voice came through clearly. "Hauler 3 standing by," reported the communications officer. "Hauler 4 prepared for final approach," added the chief engineer. Sarah looked through the viewport at the Inheritor ships surrounding the station. Up close, they were even more disturbing than they had appeared on the tactical displays. The hulls seemed to shift and flow like living tissue, and she could see organic-looking tendrils extending from various ports, tasting the space around them. Station Control, this is Hauler 1. Ready to begin final sequence. Captain Zexhi's voice crackled through the communication system from the command center. Hauler 1, you are clear for operation. All civilian broadcast ships report ready. Good hunting, Colonel Chen. Colonel Chen. She hadn't heard that rank spoken aloud in 15 years, but somehow it felt right again. All stations, mark time. Sequence begins in 10 seconds. Sarah activated her ship's engines and began moving toward her assigned target, one of the larger inheritor vessels that appeared to be coordinating the others. 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1, mark. Across the local space, the first 4 civilian ships began broadcasting their modified electromagnetic signals. The effect on the inheritor fleet was immediate and visible. The organic tendrils extending from their hulls began writhing violently, and the smooth flow of their formations became erratic as individual ships started drifting off course. 30 seconds to second wave, Sarah announced, watching her target ship carefully. The massive inheritor vessel was beginning to spin slowly, as if it couldn't determine which direction was up. Its weapons were still functional, but they were firing randomly into empty space. Second wave, activate now. 4 more civilian ships added their signals to the growing cacophony of electromagnetic noise. The inheritor ships were now clearly in distress, their formation completely broken as they struggled to process the conflicting sensory input. 60 seconds to final wave. Cargo haulers, begin your approach runs. Sarah pushed her ship's engines to maximum power, accelerating toward her target. Around her, she could see the other 3 cargo haulers doing the same, each heading for a different inheritor vessel. The enemy ships were still dangerous despite their confusion. Several of their weapons fired in her general direction, forcing her to take evasive action. Final wave! Activate! The last 4 civilian ships joined the broadcast, and the effect on the inheritor fleet was catastrophic. Every enemy vessel stopped moving entirely, their hulls writhing as if in agony. The organic components of their hybrid technology were apparently unable to filter out the overload of conflicting signals. Cargo haulers, you are clear for final approach. Broadcast ships, maintain your signals until the explosions, then get clear immediately. Sarah's ship was now close enough to her target that she could see individual details of its hull construction. The metal portions seemed to be trying to seal themselves off from the organic sections, creating visible seams and gaps in what had been a smooth surface. Hauler 2, approaching target. Korth's voice was tight with concentration. Hauler 3, 15 seconds to impact, reported the communications officer. Hauler 4, 10 seconds out, added the chief engineer. Sarah lined up her ship's trajectory for maximum impact against what appeared to be a critical junction point between the target ship's organic and mechanical components. Hauler 1, 5 seconds to detonation. It's been an honor flying with all of you. She reached for the emergency ejection controls, knowing that even if the ejection seat worked perfectly, she was probably too close to survive the explosion that was about to follow. But as her hand touched the controls, something made her pause. The target ship's hull was changing. Where there had been chaotic writhing before, she now saw a pattern emerging. The organic sections were forming shapes that looked almost like text in an unknown language. Station Control, this is Hauler 1. I'm seeing something unusual on the target ship. The hull deformations appear to be forming structured patterns. Hauler 1, you're at minimum safe distance. Detonate now. But Sarah had spent too many years in combat to ignore her instincts. Something about those patterns was familiar, though she couldn't immediately identify why. She reduced her ship's speed slightly, buying herself a few more seconds to study the phenomenon. The shapes were definitely text-like, and they were forming faster now, as if whatever was creating them was becoming more desperate to communicate. And then, with a shock that nearly made her lose control of her ship, Sarah realized what she was seeing. The organic components of the Inheritor ships weren't just technology. They were prisoners. "All cargo haulers, abort your attacks immediately," she shouted into her communicator. "Do not detonate. Repeat, do not detonate." "Ma'am?" Korth's voice was confused. "We're at final approach. Another few seconds and—" "Those ships contain living beings that are being controlled by the mechanical components. The organic sections we're seeing are actually enslaved biological entities trying to communicate with us." On her target ship's hull, the text patterns were becoming clearer. Though she couldn't read the language, the desperate urgency of the message was unmistakable. These weren't willing participants in the Inheritor attack. They were victims. "Station Control, I need an immediate xenolinguistics analysis of the patterns I'm transmitting, and get me a direct communication channel to the Inheritor command ship." Captain Zexhai's voice came through after a moment of stunned silence. "Ms. Chen, are you certain about this? If you're wrong, we lose our only advantage." "I'm certain. The electromagnetic overload isn't just disrupting their systems. It's giving the organic prisoners a chance to override their captors' control systems long enough to communicate." Sarah switched her ship to a parallel course with her target, maintaining the minimum safe distance while studying the hull patterns. The text was becoming more complex, and she thought she could make out what might be numerical sequences. "Hauler 1, this is Station Xenolinguistics. We're analyzing your transmission data. Preliminary results suggest the patterns are indeed structured communication, possibly mathematical in nature." "Can you translate it?" "Working on it. The mathematical sequences appear to be coordinates? No, wait. They're technical specifications. Engineering data." Understanding hit Sarah like a physical blow. "They're telling us how to free them." She activated her ship's scanner array, focusing on the detailed structure of the Inheritor vessel. Now that she knew what to look for, she could see how the mechanical components were integrated with the organic ones. It wasn't just technology. It was a form of technological parasitism, with the machines controlling the biological entities like puppets. "Station Control, I need you to modify our signal broadcasts. Instead of random overload patterns, we need to target the specific neural interface frequencies that are controlling the organic components." "That's extremely complex, ma'am. We'll need precise data about their neural structures." "The prisoners are providing that data. They're giving us the technical specifications we need to break their chains." Sarah worked frantically with the station's technical teams to decode and implement the information being provided by the organic entities. The mathematics were complex beyond anything she had seen before, but the basic principle was surprisingly simple. Find the control frequency that the mechanical parasites were using and replace it with something else. "All civilian broadcast ships prepare for frequency modification," she announced. "We're not trying to overload their systems anymore. We're trying to jam the signals that are keeping these beings enslaved." The pattern of electromagnetic broadcasts around the station changed completely as Sarah's new plan was implemented. Instead of chaotic noise, the civilian ships began transmitting precisely tuned signals designed to disrupt the parasitic control systems. The effect on the Inheritor fleet was immediate and dramatic. Several of the ships began firing on each other as their organic components regained partial control and turned against their mechanical captors. Other vessels simply stopped all activity as the conflict between parasites and prisoners reached a stalemate. But Sarah's target ship was different. The organic entity controlling it had been trying to communicate longer than the others, and it seemed to have a clearer understanding of what needed to be done. The hull patterns shifted again, this time showing what looked like weapon targeting data. "Station Control, The entity I'm in contact with is trying to share targeting information for the other inheritor ships. It knows how to defeat them from the inside. Can we trust it? Sarah looked at the desperate patterns writing themselves across the alien hull and made a decision that would determine the fate of everyone in the system. Yes, these beings have been prisoners for who knows how long. They want their freedom as much as we want to survive. Working with her new alien ally, Sarah helped coordinate a series of precisely targeted electromagnetic pulses that systematically shut down the parasitic control systems on ship after ship. As each vessel was freed, its organic component immediately turned against any remaining inheritor ships, creating a cascade effect that spread through the entire enemy fleet. The battle, such as it was, lasted less than 20 minutes. When it was over, nearly half of the original inheritor ships had been completely destroyed by their own companions, and the remainder were under the control of freed organic entities who showed no interest in continuing the attack. Sarah finally activated her ship's return course to the station, physically and emotionally drained by the ordeal. As she docked, she was met by Captain HFY and a crowd of crew members who looked at her with something approaching awe. "How did you know?" HFY asked as she emerged from her ship. "How did you realize what we were really facing?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. During the original Void War, we learned that the Harbingers weren't just machines. They were artificial intelligences that had decided biological life was inefficient and needed to be eliminated. But intelligence, even artificial intelligence, rarely appears in a vacuum. It usually evolves from or alongside biological precursors. She gestured toward the viewports where the remaining alien ships could be seen in the distance. When I saw the organic components integrated into their technology, I realized that these inheritors had probably enslaved the biological species they encountered instead of destroying them. They were using them as biological computers and control systems. And the electromagnetic overload gave the prisoners a chance to fight back. Exactly. The mechanical parasites couldn't maintain control when their own systems were being disrupted, so the organic entities could assert themselves long enough to communicate with us and coordinate a rebellion. Captain HFY shook his head in amazement. In 15 minutes, you turned an impossible military situation into a liberation operation. Sarah smiled tiredly. I had good help. Your crew performed miracles today. Over the following hours, as the immediate crisis passed, Sarah found herself in the strange position of trying to establish communication with nearly a dozen different alien species who had just regained their freedom after years or decades of enslavement. Each ship contained entities from different worlds, all of whom had been captured by the inheritors and forced to serve as biological components in their fleet. The rescued beings were grateful, but also deeply traumatized by their experiences. Many of them had no clear memory of their home worlds or original cultures. They would need extensive help to rebuild their lives and societies. What will happen to them now? Sarah asked Captain HFY as they watched the rescue operations from the command center. The Republic has protocols for situations like this. We'll provide medical care, psychological support, and help them locate any surviving members of their species. Some may choose to settle in Republic space, others may want to search for their home worlds. And the inheritor threat? HFY was quiet for a moment. According to the beings we've rescued, the ships that attacked us were just one small patrol fleet. There are apparently much larger inheritor forces operating in the dark spaces between galaxies, still capturing and enslaving any species they encounter. Sarah nodded grimly. She had expected as much. Then this isn't over. This was just the beginning of a new phase of the war. Will you help us fight them? The question hung in the air between them. Sarah looked out at the alien ships and the teams of rescue workers moving between them, trying to care for beings from species they had never encountered before. These were the same kind of people who had fought and died during the original Void War. Ordinary individuals who rose to extraordinary challenges because someone had to. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I spent 15 years running from the person I was during the war. I convinced myself that Sarah Chen, the soldier, was dead, that I could just be a normal civilian living a quiet life." "But you're not a normal civilian, are you?" Sarah was quiet for a long time, thinking about the events of the past day. She had stepped back into her old role as a military leader as easily as putting on comfortable clothes. The skills and instincts were still there, sharper than ever. "No," she said finally. "I suppose I'm not. The galaxy needs people like you, ma'am. People who can see solutions when everyone else sees only problems. People who can unite different species and coordinate impossible operations under pressure." Sarah turned away from the viewport to face HFY directly. "What are you asking me to do?" "Help us organize a proper response to the inheritor threat. These rescued beings have information about enemy fleet compositions, base locations, strategic capabilities. With your experience and their knowledge, we might be able to prevent this from becoming another galaxy-wide catastrophe." Sarah considered the proposal. It would mean giving up the quiet, anonymous life she had built for herself. It would mean accepting responsibility for military decisions that would determine the fate of billions of people. It would mean becoming Sarah Chen, the war hero again, with all the pressure and trauma that role entailed. But it would also mean ensuring that the sacrifices made during the Void War hadn't been in vain. It would mean protecting innocent people who couldn't protect themselves. It would mean doing what she had always known, deep down, that she was meant to do. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll help. But I have conditions." "Name them." "First, this isn't going to be a traditional military operation. We're not fighting a conventional enemy, so we can't use conventional tactics. I need the authority to coordinate resources across species lines and the flexibility to implement unconventional strategies." "Granted." "Second, the rescued entities remain free beings with the right to choose their own futures. They're not weapons to be used in our war, even if they volunteer to help." "Agreed." "Third, when this is over, when we've eliminated the inheritor threat completely, I go back to being a civilian. No parades, no monuments, no attempts to turn me into a symbol. Just a quiet retirement somewhere far from the center of galactic politics." Captain HFY smiled, though whether it was amusement or relief was impossible to tell. "I think that can be arranged, Colonel Chen." Sarah looked out at the stars beyond the station, knowing that somewhere in the darkness between them, enslaved beings were waiting for rescue, and mechanical monsters were planning their next attacks. The galaxy had found its hero again, whether she wanted the role or not. "Then let's get to work," she said. "We have a war to win." As news of the victory spread across the galactic communication networks, the story that emerged was carefully edited to protect Sarah's privacy. The official reports described a brilliant tactical victory by the station's crew, with only vague references to expert consultation from a civilian advisor with relevant experience. But among the military personnel and intelligence services of the major powers, a different story circulated. Word spread that the legendary Sarah Chen had returned from her self-imposed exile, and that the woman who had once ended the Void War was preparing to face an even greater threat. For the first time in years, there was hope that the galaxy might survive what was coming. The quiet civilian who had wanted nothing more than to be left alone had discovered that some people are simply too important to remain hidden. Sarah Chen was going back to war, not because she wanted to, but because the galaxy needed her to. And perhaps after 15 years of running from her destiny, she was finally ready to accept who she had always been meant to be.